What if the next fight for liberty is not happening outside the Republican Party, but inside of it? The truth is, a lot of liberty-minded voters have gotten very good at diagnosing what the problem is: debt, centralized power, foreign policy drift, rigged political conventions that feel scripted before the first delegate ballot is ever counted. The question is whether liberty voters want to keep being right from a distance or start fighting where the decisions are actually being made. Today, appropriately at FreedomFest, Mike ter Maat made the case for taking the liberty fight into the GOP. Is it a strategic shift? Is it a surrender? Or is this the only battle that actually matters? Let's get into it in this episode of Liberty Lens with none other than my friend and the guy with the spotlight on him right now, Mr. Mike ter Maat. Mike, how are you doing today?
John, it's great to be with you. We have made what I think is the most fun, most innovative, most exciting announcement at FreedomFest or anywhere else this week. I'm running for vice president.
Yes, and congratulations on that. And, we've been teasing this announcement for a couple of weeks now. And I've been one of those folks that consider myself very fortunate that you let me in on this decision a while ago. And being like the sort of loquacious Greek fellow that I am, I've had a lot of trouble biting my tongue, not spilling the beans, and trying to stay with the program. But yes, congratulations. You have announced this campaign. It is very unique in American history. And I want to give you a few minutes now to explain, basically, tell us what you announced at Freedom Fest earlier today, and what it means for the folks that are interested in liberty.
Well, thanks. I do appreciate that. And it is true that no one in 250 years of American political history has ever run for vice president in the past. No one has ever sought the nomination of a major party for vice president, which is probably everything that you need to know. The first question somebody might ask is, why not, right? And I think there are two dueling questions. One is, why are we doing this? And the other one is, why hasn't anyone else done this? And they go hand in hand. They are opposite sides of exactly the same coin. One of the big reasons we're doing this is because the way that we choose vice presidents in this country is stupid. The second reason, we can talk about that. The second reason we're doing this is because we believe that the Republican Party is moving in a more liberty-minded direction, and we want to unify the Republican Party and include somebody from the liberty movement, yours truly, on the national ticket as a matter of unifying the party and recognizing the direction that the party is going in the future. We believe it is the future of the party. And everything, as I mentioned, that you need to know is that no one's ever done this before because folks have not been interested in unifying the party and empowering the national delegates to select the vice presidential nominee. And people have allowed a very silly process to continue decade after decade of allowing the presidential nominee to anoint the vice presidential nominee unilaterally without any legitimate or democratic process whatsoever. And we aim to change that, John.
And I think people, when they initially hear of this plan, they're like, wait a second, what do you mean nobody's ever run for vice president? Haven't we had a ton of vice presidents? But I think what you're saying is, now, I don't think this, I know you're saying this, right? That running for vice president has never been done as to its own end, right? People have run for president that end up accepting the vice presidency if they don't get the presidential nomination.
Yep.
In the early days of our nation, the vice president was the guy who came in second, regardless of party affiliation, regardless of association with the eventual president. But those cases are strictly different than what you're describing. You're saying, I am running specifically to be vice president of the United States. Now, Mike, for most people, they go to their primary ballot. They can't cast a vote in the primary for vice president specifically. So when we're running this campaign, when Mike ter Maat is running this campaign, how does it actually work?
we are going to be running what I would characterize as largely a wholesale campaign as opposed to a retail campaign, which is to say, reaching out to the national delegates, the people who are likely to become national delegates, the folks that are actually going to have to vote at the 2028 National Convention of the Republican Party in Houston, by the way, in the summer of 2028. We're reaching out to these people. There'll be a couple of thousand people in that room, but you know, you don't know exactly who they will be. So you got to reach out to a whole bunch of thousands of people who are potential national delegates and make the case that you want to take matters into your own hands and vote, that you already have the authority and the power to do so. As a matter of fact, legally, national delegates are required to vote. The problem, John, is that today it's a one-step process, right? No thinking allowed, just vote. And we're asking folks, make it a two-step process. Think and then vote. And so we're reaching out to the national delegates to suggest to them that they engage in a fully adult method of voting, that they think first, take matters into their own hands, vote their conscience. We prefer they vote for me, by the way, but ask for a floor vote. There has not been a floor vote for vice president in a major party since 1956. We've gone 70 years, and that was in the Democratic Party. The last time it happened in the Republican Party, I don't even know when, probably maybe never, I don't know. But we've gone 70 years with the presidential nominee just unilaterally announcing who the VP nominee is going to be, and everyone just rolls over. And we're going to be campaigning to convince the national delegates, number one, to take matters into their own hands and cast a vote for whomever they want, right? But number two, signal in advance that you're going to do so.
Right.
We're not trying to sow division and chaos here. We would like the national delegates to make clear in advance that they intend to ask for a floor vote and vote their conscience and to be responsible for selecting the next vice presidential nominee. And by signaling in advance, they can save the presidential nominee, the soon-to-be presidential nominee, by virtue of winning the primaries, from having to go through that process himself in selecting a VP nominee, but rather defer to the floor, defer to the delegation, defer to the convention, defer to the party. We believe it is the party's responsibility to select a VP. It is legally the party's responsibility, but for the past 70 years, both parties have neglected to avail themselves of the opportunity and the responsibility and just deferred to one person to make this choice.
And what you just described really is the concept of empowering delegates to vote their conscience wherever their conscience may take them, right? So the way
And
I
we
see
hope it'll take them in a liberty-minded direction.
we hope it takes them in the liberty-minded direction. We hope it takes them in the direction of Mike ter Maat. Absolutely, no doubt. However, I think what you state is very important. Your role here is not to render the Republican Party asunder, right? This is not an effort on your part to say, I'm going to blow things up.
No.
From what I understand, this is an effort for you to empower the delegates, which of course, you know, that's obvious from your initial statement, but it's also in a way a check on power, is it not?
It is. Not only do we believe that the way that we do it is dopey, but it's a huge missed opportunity. The party has an opportunity here to become more competitive, more democratic, to follow a more legitimate process, to reach out to young people. John, imagine if you're a young person in the Republican Party these days, and you get, by young people, I mean, you know, anyone under the age of 50, right? Imagine if you're a young person in the Republican Party and you get reminded, you know, the way that VP nominees is chosen is one guy or one gal makes this decision, no transparency, no process, no vote, no public vetting. He just decides and everyone has to go along with it. I think most young people would say, That sounds like something grandpa would put up with, right? I think we're going to look back in 20 years and say, I can't believe we went a whole century doing something so dumb, right? Young people, everyone in the liberty movement, but young people everywhere are fed up with the lack of transparency in how our institutions work, how our political processes work, the concentration of power, the concentration of authority. Why would we? The more you think about it, the more insane it is that we follow this process, right? Why would we want to continue that? And I think it's a huge opportunity because there's going to be a first mover advantage, whichever party decides to institute a more legitimate and more democratic process. I'm not suggesting you have to go all the way to a primary for VP, although I guess, someday maybe that's a good idea. But just having a floor vote, just having 2,000 people weigh in would be 2,000 times better than having one person choose. Whichever party makes this decision first to institute a more legitimate process is going to have a big advantage over the other party, right? Can you imagine if you're the party that still thinks it's a good idea to have Joe Biden lock himself in a room and then announce it's going to be Kamala Harris, right? Or do you want to be the party that says we just picked a presidential nominee, now we're going to pick a vice presidential nominee, and we're going to have the whole party weigh in by virtue of the 2,000 delegates at the convention? Which party would you respect more?
Oh, absolutely. And look, let's face it, even though neither one of us are progressive leftists or anything like that, imagine if you are someone who's interested in fairness, a distribution of power. Picture if you're a Democrat in 2016 and your party delegates had said, okay, Hillary, you've maneuvered yourself into the presidential nomination, but as delegates, we're voting to pair you up with Bernie Sanders because that's where we think the party needs to be. That's the transparency we needed in 2016. Now imagine if I'm the voter and I, like many Democratic voters, felt Bernie got screwed, right?
Well, he did. He did get screwed.
He did, right.
I think that's objectively speaking. I don't know if there is such a thing as objectively saying someone got screwed,
Right.
but yeah.
Yeah. The delegates could have corrected that, and the delegates could have read the pulse of the nation. And to your point, short of going full primary, which maybe we'll get there one day for the VP position, that's the much better position. It takes away the hubris and the blinders that the presidential nominee might have, and the delegates being in a better position. So,
it's interesting. By the way, once again, it's always interesting to hear your thoughts because we didn't discuss it in advance. Fascinating example with Bernie Sanders. I would go so far as to say, you and I have noticed, data show that there are a lot of folks. I don't have data in front of me. I don't know how many folks, but a significant minority of folks in the Democratic Party who supported Bernie became Trump supporters.
yes.
Now that may seem weird, right, to some of us, but they're both populists and both willing to speak his mind, plain spoken, down to earth. Both a little off the chain from the point of view of their major party superstructures and establishments. So I get all that. Imagine if the Democratic Party had chosen Bernie and it was a Hillary Bernie ticket.
Right.
By the way, I don't know what the conversation was like between Hillary and Bernie in which the decision was made for her not to pick him. Right. But imagine if the party had a movement on the floor and he just couldn't resist it. That's a ticket that, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this as a Republican, but that's a ticket that might win.
It might have. But certainly, it would have better aligned the party to the delegates and to the people. I think you would have had a clearer alignment across all three touch points there. And I think that's what you're trying to accomplish here by announcing this campaign.
And I think that we can not only nominate a vice president who will help hang on to the liberty movement folks,
Mm,
right? I think I'm the best one to check that box clearly, but
right.
there are others who could probably do it too. But the idea itself is a liberty movement type of idea, right? It's
Yes.
what you had said earlier, the idea of being a little skeptical of the concentration of power and skeptical of these processes without any transparency. That's what we're going for. And I think that it would be nice to have. I would go so far as to say I think past vice presidents believe it would be nice to have a more legitimate process behind them. If you're if you're a JD Vance fan, right? I'm sure there's a lot of JD Vance fans out there. Maybe some are listening. Imagine how much more JD Vance you'd be getting today than the amount of JD Vance you are getting if J.D. Vance had gone through a more legitimate, more democratic process when he was selected VP. I mean, I can't guarantee that the delegates would have chosen him, but if they had, no reason to believe that, they necessarily wouldn't have, if they had chosen him, he would have more of a legitimate process behind him, more of a mandate, perhaps, maybe a little bit more willingness to speak his mind in public, a little bit of independence. I think that would be a terrific thing. I think it would be a terrific thing for governance. I think it'd be a terrific thing for the Constitution, rather than these situations where the VP just feels politically beholden to one person. The classic example, and then I'll shut up, but this just occurred. You brought up the Democratic Party as an example. Kamala Harris going on The View, being asked, is there anything you'd do differently? And she said, no.
Right.
That's just a stupid political answer. But where that comes from is, gee, I've gone 3 years. I wasn't allowed to think for myself, right? Now, all of a sudden, you ask me to have a fresh thought. I'm rusty. Like, I don't know what to say. That's what we're trying to avoid.
And that's the part when you first mentioned this campaign to me, what seems like eons ago in my mind, because uh, you know, yeah, yeah, is the independence of the vice presidency and how it's nurtured more through this process, right? Um, Look, politically in the Republican Party, we saw that during the, say, the Iran conflict, reports, even in that book by Haberman and Swan, right? There, it's been pretty much accepted now that the lone voice in the Trump administration that was against the Iran war was J.D. Vance.
Yeah.
But because of the
And in
way,
fairness, we don't know the extent of his, we don't know whether he just expressed, let's be careful, or if he said, this is a bad idea. We don't know exactly what he said.
right, but I think most reports have said he was against it.
Yeah.
Now, part of being a vice president, which we admit going forward would still be the case, even if this campaign successfully goes through, is, the vice president is a supporter of the president. There is no doubt about that. But politically, to be, if you're selected by the president as opposed to the delegates, your allegiance is to the president, not to the delegates, not to the people by extension. I ask folks out there in the liberty movement who are also Republicans, had J.D. Vance the independence of knowing he had been selected by the delegates, and that in 2028, if he's facing the delegates again to run for president, would he have been a little more forceful in putting his foot down and saying, Mr. President, I think this is a horrible mistake. Mr. President, this is not in the best interests of the United States. This is not in the best interests of liberty. How much more of a possibility do we have of avoiding the Iran war?
I think I don't know what percentage, right? But even if it's only 10% better chance of avoiding the war as it was prosecuted, I have said many times that this war may be the kind of thing that in the long run, another year, another decade, eventually we were going to end up in. So maybe in the long run, there's no way to avoid it. But the way we got into it was super badly managed. Is there a possibility of delaying it and therefore managing it better? Absolutely. And that's what I mean by how much more JD Vance may we have gotten, because we're only getting a tiny bit now, and it sounds like only behind closed doors. To your point, I think not only would the vice president feel more emboldened to speak his mind, especially in public, if he had a democratic process behind him, if he felt like he had the whole party behind him instead of just being selected by one guy. But there would be, John, a different expectation of the public. In the situation we have now, and this isn't about J.D. Vance and Donald Trump, but there's plenty of other examples. Kamala Harris is the easiest one to pick on, but she's easy to pick on anyway, so maybe that's not a great example. But pick whatever example you like. The VP who is picked by one person, the general public looks at that and figures, you're his guy, right? Joe Biden was Barack Obama's guy. And so that if Joe Biden had an independent thought and expressed it, work with me. This is a weird example because it's hard to imagine Joe Biden having an independent thought, but this is as a thought experiment. If he had an independent thought and expressed it, I think a lot of people in the Democratic Party would have exploded. Like, what are you doing? You're Barack Obama's guy. Barack Obama picked you. Stay in your lane, mister. Right? Whereas if it were exactly the same guy, but had been chosen by the party, the reaction would be, you better speak your mind. We picked you. We put you there. Right? You are not merely Barack Obama's guy. If there's something going wrong constitutionally, or in the Democratic Party's case, wokely, you better speak your mind. You better do what we want you to do. You're our guy. And that political reaction, due to expectations and the alignment of expectations,
Right.
to a politician is frequently more important than reality itself.
You're right. And the word that popped in my head, you won't use it, was lackey. Politically, a vice president is expected to be the president's lackey. He's not there to engage the president in healthy debate. He's not there to make sure the president stays on the straight and narrow, as it is right now. And I emphasize this again, in a very closely divided Senate, in a very polarized and divided nation, we've seen several key votes come down in the Senate to the vice president casting his tie-breaking vote. It's not theory. It's not this once-in-a-lifetime event. It's a regular. I think to date, Vance may have casted 3 to 4 tie-breaking votes in the Senate so far, just in this current administration, right? So we're not talking about something that's just a formality or ceremonial right now. The vice president matters. And aside from all the philosophical reasons that we've put forth, there's also the very practical reason that you need someone who is going to represent an independent voice.
That's a good point, just from a mechanical standpoint, right? But there's another, there's another way to look at this, which is to say that the vice president is the only person in the executive branch whom the president cannot fire, right? Elected official, there's only 2 elected officials in the entire executive branch, and one of them behaves as though he's a low-level Schedule C, right? Behaves like he's 5 rungs down on the pole and therefore has to fall in line, whereas the reality is he's the only one whom you would expect, or she is the only one whom you would expect to have his or her own political base, right? They were a grown-ass adult politician before they became VP. They can't be fired. It's a huge missed opportunity when they don't speak their mind. Imagine an alternative universe in which a VP were able to, for example, stand up for the Constitution, stand up for the Fourth Amendment when ICE agents lose their way in Minneapolis, right? Something that personally offended me as a cop and a training officer. I'm going to assume that the agents were well intentioned. I'm going to assume that the policy was well intentioned, but very, very badly executed. And it would be nice if someone in the administration were to have told the truth, as we all saw it with our eyes, told the truth about we need to do a better job of adhering to the Constitution. Imagine a vice president who spoke up during budget negotiations, right? When
Right.
the budget is about to allow our federal debt to expand from 100% of our annual income to 130% of our annual income, and no one in the administration seems upset about this. I don't mean a VP needs to set his hair on fire necessarily. I'm not suggesting you be a jerk about it. We're not asking someone to sow chaos, but you could express an independent thought. You could say, this is a big deal. This is something that in Vance's case, he actually did express concern about it a decade earlier, but now that concern seems to be
Right.
gone. So it's a real lost opportunity.
I agree. And, in your talking, the point you brought up that the vice president is the only person in the executive branch that can't be fired. He doesn't serve at the will of the president. Think of the counterfactual of January 6th when Mike Pence didn't go along with the president's wishes, and the president did have the ability to fire him like any other employee of the executive branch, right?
Like Nixon and his attorneys general.
Exactly. Exactly. Or and I understand that, but your point is well taken that independence, that sort of like, hey, I can't get fired. So, but there's the political angle that if you're there because the president picked you as opposed to why the delegates picked you, politically it gives you that courage. It's sort of the equivalent of liquid courage for politicians, right? If you know the party backs you and the delegates back you, and it's not there because of the grace of the one guy sitting in the Oval Office.
Absolutely. And like I say, it changes expectations, right?
Absolutely. All right, Mike. So the campaign, which you just described, why you're doing it, let me just touch on the obvious question, right? The elephant in the room, which is, hey, we know about this Mike ter Maat guy. Wasn't he the Libertarian Party vice presidential nominee in 2024?
I do know something about running for vice president. Yes, that's right.
So you do have that experience, but I could see Republican voters, Republican delegates saying, "What's he doing in the GOP? Why doesn't this guy stick to the LP? What's he doing in our backyard right now?" And I'll tee it up for you. You told me at the beginning of this, you said, "John, I'm doing this because I think the only fight that matters in the coming years is within the GOP. I'm doing this because I feel the need and the calling to do this." Mike, if you don't mind, explain to me what that calling is and why you feel this way, why you're doing
I
this.
think
Aside from the political one, I want to know why Mike is doing this.
yeah, I appreciate that. I think that there's two things to bear in mind for me personally. One is that as a long-term Republican, right? Not too many people are going to be able to accuse me of having lately joined their party, right? That would require you to be able to say you were working for the Republican Party in 1992 when I was, right? Not too many people out there predate my professional experience campaigning for the Republican Party. I spent all of 92 on the communications staff for the reelection campaign. I spent 1990 and 91 working for the White House when George Herbert Walker Bush was my boss's 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 boss. I spent the 90s working for various Republican, I campaigned for Bob Dole. I campaigned for W in Austin, Texas. That's a funny thing, right? When he was running for reelection as governor of the Lone Star State. I spent a lot of time around the Republican Party. I grew up fiscally conservative. So working for the guy who had said, read my lips, no new taxes, and then agreed to new taxes is a tough moment, right? It's a tough moment. And I'm someone who grew up, very, very conservatively. But in our generation, John, when you grow up conservatively, that didn't mean you impose your political will to move your faith-based values in imposition on someone else. Right. And so when friends of mine in the party came to me and asked me to support the Defense of Marriage Act, for example, right? I can remember thinking, and I even said out loud to a friend of mine, even if we were the most homophobic, bigoted people on the planet, which I hope we're not, right? But I recognize some folks are. Even if that were the case, why would I care? Why are you telling me to care about this issue in such a fashion as to support the Defense of Marriage Act, which, kids, ask your parents, was federal statute to not allow same-sex marriage, right? Why, why motivate me, make me care? And when I said this to a buddy of mine, I distinctly remember the circumstance. He said, "You're a libertarian." And I remember what I said to him. I don't say horrible things to you. Why would you say such a mean thing to me, right? But he, of course, was right. And I joined the Libertarian Party around the time I changed careers and became a police officer in 2010, 2011. Spent more than a decade in the Libertarian Party, was the VP nominee. My team is still of the Liberty Movement. We were of the Liberty Movement before joining the Liberty Party. We're of the Liberty Movement now. We joined the Republican Liberty Caucus as a team of 45 people last year. Rejoined the Republican Party because this is the debate that's going to matter. The debate that's going to matter. I believe in the whole world, but certainly in American politics, the debate that's going to matter is how is the Republican Party going to define itself in the wake of the exodus of President Trump? Is it going to go in a more populist direction, or is it going to get back to its basic principles of supporting free markets, fiscal conservatism, adherence to the Constitution? Are we going to stand up for folks' medical freedom? Are we going to ask for an America First foreign policy? These are the basics, and we need to get back to those basics. The Libertarian Party is not going to. We wish the LP well, but for a variety of structural reasons, the Libertarian Party is not going to play a role in American politics of any significance beyond the role it's played the past 50 years going forward.
Right.
And I would go so far as to say, John, and this brings me no joy, the Democratic Party will not play a significant role in the American political debate. They'll win elections. Maybe, they're threatening to gain control of the House. They're even threatening to gain control of the Senate. But as far as playing a significant contribution on an intellectual level to the political debate in this country, what direction we need to go, they're not even to the starting line. The debate that's going to matter is whether or not the Republican Party gets back to basics. And that has always been where I have been, where my team has been, where we want to be. It's a natural fit. And I would go so far as to say, if you're not on board with these basics, you need to get on board, because that's where the Republican Party is going.
And that's interesting. Excuse me. And I obviously agree with you to a large extent. So tell me, you just described like your first principles, why you're doing this. Um, who is this for in terms of the voting people out there, for the delegates, for the actual voters? What does what does we talk about pillars in a campaign. We talk about core principles. You've kind of touched on them, but give me some examples like Mike ter Maat in the Republican Party, member of the RLC. What are some of his pillars that people and delegates should be aware of? What are
Yeah.
you actually promoting?
And thanks for mentioning the Republican Liberty Caucus, because the RLC has been a strong voice for liberty in the Republican Party for decades and decades and decades. This is the old caucus of Ron Paul and company, right? For many decades, and was before I joined the Libertarian Party. After coming back from the Libertarian Party, it's a tremendous caucus, and people can go to our website, by the way, and learn about it and connect to the RLC website as well. By the basics, John, I mean, for example, we need to stop spending so much money. One of the reasons why it costs so much to live in the United States is because the government keeps taking our money. Of course, it costs a lot to live in the United States and feels expensive when the government is taking 40% of your money, right? Of course it does. This is not something you hear discussed in the Democratic Party. And unfortunately, it's not something that you hear discussed enough anymore in the Republican Party. And it's so basic, right? Of course, it's hard to make ends meet when the government is taking 40%, a third, a quarter of all of your income, when it's overtaxing through property taxes where you live, either as a renter or an owner, whether you're in a condo or a house, whatever. The property taxes are killing you. It's taking all our money. The reason the government is taking all our money is because the government spends too much money. We need to stop the government from spending so much money. And there's a couple of aspects of that. Number one, we need to stop the government from doing so many stupid things with our money. And we need the government to stop taking our money, even for things that maybe you like, but we just can't afford all these good ideas. I'm reminded of what Hillary Clinton said some years ago. I have lots of good ideas. We just can't afford them all. That's right, Hillary. That makes them bad ideas. Just, there's no such thing as a good idea that the government can't afford. No, that makes it a bad idea, okay? We have lots of ideas that would otherwise be great, but we can't afford them. And so we need to cut back on the way our government spends money and takes money across the board. And then in addition to that, stop wasting our money. We should be spending less money on defending Europe, less money on defending the Middle East, less money on attacking the Middle East, trillions down the drain in Afghanistan, trillions, that's a lot of money. Millions is a lot of money. Trillions down the drain in Iraq. We need to cut it out, or our government's going to go bankrupt and there's going to be hell to pay. And John, we need to get back to supporting free markets. Our economy can grow faster. President Trump is right about that. But his administration has been wrong about the prescription, about how to do that, how to get from here to there. We need to get out of the way, stop bossing companies around, letting them do their business. We need to have absolutely in America first, all the above energy policy. Let energy prices come down and stay down. We should not be in the business of driving up energy prices every couple of years and making them spike and then praying they come back down. This is not an efficient way to run an energy policy. We need to get out of the way of our private sector and allow investments in the United States from abroad, allow investments abroad from inside the United States, and most importantly, allow investment, especially in high tech, inside the United States made by Americans. And so we need to get out of the way and let our economy grow, or we're never going to grow our way out of our debt crisis.
And it's refreshing to hear someone who understands economics explain what's going on with our economy and how to cure it, and an appreciation for free markets and America first foreign policy, which is, of course, what you just described right now. Mike, especially today at FreedomFest, where you have like-minded individuals, tell me a little bit. How are people reacting to your announcement, as far as you can tell?
People like the idea. There are two kinds of people that we're targeting. One is people who are going to be national delegates, right? People who are going to be continue to be in the Republican establishment. You don't get a whole lot of those people at Freedom Fest, right? You don't get a whole lot of those people. The people that we have already talked to, and we just made the announcement, so I talked to a lot of people on the way in to the conference, before we arrived, so I can answer your question a little bit, but it's not by virtue of the time spent at Freedom Fest. The other group of people are liberty-minded activists who are in the Republican Party, or who want to be in the Republican Party, right? Have felt maybe ostracized or marginalized by the Republican Party. A lot of people who have been in the Republican Party for a long, long time and want to see the party get back to its basics. These kind of activists love the idea because they recognize the way our system works now is dopey, both in terms of how we pick a VP and in terms of how we run our policy making apparatus, domestic policy, as well as international policy, and are looking for change. And at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. It's about change, changing the system, changing the processes, changing our policy, and changing the direction that our government is on. Because if we don't change the direction of our government, we're going to run into either eventually a war that we can't get out of. We've been whistling past the graveyard. All the wars that we start, we seem to have been able to extract ourselves without a nuclear conflict up until now. Or number two, we're going to run into a financial crisis and the government's going to implode and miss an interest payment sometime in the next few years. That's going to be hell to pay. That's a worldwide recession. Or number three, another form of crisis that we don't spend a lot of time talking about that worries me very much is one of civil unrest. We go through these spates of rioting and violent demonstrations every few years. And we see politicians increasingly willing to crack down hard. That is dangerous stuff. And I worry about a scenario like that spiraling out of control. That comes from the polarized nature of our politics. Right. And that comes from a broken political system that finds it much more incentivizing to keep problems going rather than solve them.
Yeah, agreed. These are real issues. These are real dangers, real pitfalls for the country. And I don't think it's an overstatement. I'm not going to go into the traditional hacky, the most important election of our lifetimes, because every election is stated as being the most important election of our lifetime.
A few of them have become unimportant, John, with the Republicans and Democrats looking so similar.
Exactly. But I will say that I think the ideological battle of are we still a nation of liberal sensibilities? Not in the political sense, but the American tradition, the classical liberal tradition, the conservative tradition of, free markets, free expression, living independently, less government intrusion on each person's life.
And tolerance for your neighbor.
And
cultural tolerance. Tolerance yes. For different political views. Reverence for the First Amendment.
Right. Reverence for the Constitution, let's face it. That perhaps is the great battle that's looming, coming up on us very quickly, Mike. And I think you and I are aligned on that our nation was always referred to as the great experiment in governance. And there are unfortunately those of every political stripe in America that think that experiment is a failure for their own reasons. And I think we need to rededicate ourselves to the concept that this is the only government that's ever worked. This is the only government for the people, by the people. So, to that extent, I think this is where your campaign fits into that. It really does address that issue. It starts to chip away at that issue. What do we still believe in the American experiment? And thank you for taking this on. I know it's not an easy burden to bear, so I'll say that to you and say thank you for taking this on. I certainly appreciate what you're doing, and please let us know if we've reached anybody today on this podcast with your efforts and with your campaign. How can they help? How can people check in and make sure that Mike ter Maat gets delegates to empower themselves to take back their responsibilities and to take that seriously and select the vice president and then finally make that vice president Mike ter Maat?
Reach out to me. Reach out to the campaign. You can reach out to me at mike@miketermott.com. You can reach out on the website and just sign up for the newsletter, right? That's an easy, soft entry point. Low commitment, right? Very low commitment. You can make a donation. We're running a political action committee to support the effort. We don't need $1 trillion. We're not going to waste someone's $20 million. We just need several hundred thousand to facilitate getting around and getting our message out. That's what it's all about. This is not going to be one of these highly inefficient campaigns. I remember what Tulsi Gabbard said about when the governor of Florida was running for president. I don't even know how you spend $100 million. I felt that. Oh, I'm sorry. It was Nikki Haley who said that. I don't even know how you spend $100 million talking about Ron DeSantis. We are not going to have that problem, right? We are going to raise a modest amount of money. If someone would like to make a contribution, that's fine. But arguably, even more importantly, we would love to have folks join our team, help us with the outreach effort. If you're a young person out there or a person with some gray hair, either way, if you either have relationships with your delegates or, wait for it, would like to get some, if you would like to meet the folks who are representing you, who are going to represent you at the national convention, by the way, you should. I think you should get to know these people, right? They are important to you. Then reach out to us and we'll set you up because we're looking for folks who want to have those conversations, right? Who want to reach out to their, sometimes they're your local officials. Sometimes they're your state house reps and your state senators, your state leaders in your state. We're not going to ask you, if you live in Texas, we're not going to ask you to call someone in Maryland. Ooh. We're going to ask you to reach out to folks whom you should be getting to know anyway and have a conversation with them. And these are not hard sells, by the way. These are soft sells. Hey, what do you think about, leaning into the authority you already have and playing a role in picking the next vice presidential nominee, right? And seeing what they say. And if you can move them along in that conversation, all the better. But at least get them thinking. We've got 2 years to get these folks to think about it. And then, only a piece of the pitch. I like how you framed it. A piece of the pitch is you ought to think about Mike ter Maat for vice president. But the first step is getting them think a little bit differently about the way the process works.
Sure. And the other thing you brought to the fore, which I don't emphasize enough, is if you're in the great state of Texas, we're not asking you to try to influence one of those Yankees up in New York, right? We're saying go down to whoever your delegate is. He's your neighbor. He might be your friend. He might be a colleague, and just start this conversation and just say, hey, at the convention, at the state convention, at the national convention, what do you think about taking back some of your power, some of what you already have? Because again, we're not asking people to vote or to support something crazy. We're not asking them to invent a new power or a new authority.
This
This
isn't a
exists.
constitutional amendment or federal statute. You
Right.
already have to vote. We're just asking you to think and then vote.
Exactly. The power's within you. Just use it. Learn to use it and be willing to use it. All right. Well, Mike, I'm going to say this was a pleasure. And as always, I'm behind you when you do in your efforts here. You know that all along. And I would like the people to do that. Again, go to MikeTerMaat.com. There's plenty of information there. There's ways for you to help or contribute, whichever way you feel you can contribute. If you're someone watching this, go to MikeTerMaat.com, um, and spread the word. Let people know there's this guy running a weird campaign to be vice president of the United States who is not running to be president. Very clearly, he's running to be vice president, and get your delegates in on that. Mike, I'll give you the last word.
It's a joy to be with you. It's going to be a very, very fun campaign. Reach out to me. Let's do this together, because as much fun as it's going to be to do something no one's ever done before, it's going to be even more fun to do it as a team.
Absolutely. Everyone out there, click like and subscribe to get more Liberty Lens, so you can follow Mike. Now we can follow Mike on this effort every week right here on Liberty Lens. In addition to talking about the issues of the day, he'll be giving us updates on how the campaign is progressing. So until next time, this is Big John with vice presidential candidate Mike ter Maat in the GOP. Until next time, peace out.